Today's video is sponsored by SpecOps Password Policy, the ultimate solution in securing your Active Directory passwords and continuously blocking over 4 billion breached passwords. Visit them today at specopssoft.com. In this week's video, we're going to check out my top tips to securing Microsoft 365, and you don't need an E5 license. Check it out. You will learn something. Hey everyone, great to see you. Andy here. I really do appreciate you dropping by. Well, on today's episode, I'm going to check out my top tips for securing Microsoft 365. So I'm ensuring that keeping your data and your users safe is absolutely paramount. So I'm going to give you lots of tips and tricks on how you can secure it and really kind of keep the bad guys away. And the key thing here is you don't need an E5 plan. Now, of course, if you have an E5 plan, you get all those additional security features, and I've covered that in previous videos. But here, I just want to take a look at products like Business Standard and also some of the enhancements that Business Premium provides. Now, if you have questions and comments about this or any of my other sessions, as always, get those down below. And if you've not subscribed, bump the subscribe button and come on board and join me. Now, just a reminder, I'm going to be speaking at a number of upcoming conferences. I'm going to be speaking at NIC, the Nordic Infrastructure Conference, in November, and I'm also speaking at Tech Mentor Live 360 in Orlando in November, as well as Microsoft Ignite. So if you're going to be attending any of those conferences, it would be great to see you. So I think without any further ado, let's jump in and take a look then at my top tips at managing and securing Microsoft 365. You enjoy. Okay, so to get started then, looking at Microsoft 365, I've come into this website, m365maps.com. This is a great website for comparing the different plans, and you can check this out yourselves. So I'm coming into Microsoft 365 Business, and I want to take a comparison between the standard edition and the premium edition. And notably here, you can see things like data loss prevention policies are only available in the premium edition, as well as things like e-discovery standard. Now, just to mention that things like information protection, message encryption, these are all included as standard in Business Premium. But if you're going for the cheaper Business Basic, again, Business Basic is really very basic, but the standard edition, you do get some nice features for kind of operating Microsoft 365. But as you can see, in terms of security, it's really lacking some of the basic things. And even when we scroll down and looking at things like retention, in other words, there is no compliance in Microsoft 365 standard. So, you know, if your business is, for example, a medical facility, or it's a law firm, or some organization where you have to do compliance, then I'm afraid that Business Standard is not going to cut the grain here. So you really want to take a look at Business Premium. Now, in comparison to Business Premium, what I can do is I can just come down to the Enterprise Edition here. And if I click on the E5 Enterprise Edition, you can see that we really do get quite a lot more. But again, it is a lot more for your money. To be fair, it is quite expensive, but you do get quite a difference. And I mean, the core things for a small business: information protection, data loss prevention policies, and of course that all-important retention. So tip number one, check out the comparison maps at m365maps.com. Okay, so I've come into Microsoft 365 and I'm coming to the Entra portal, and I'm clicking into the Identity Overview page. Now in here we have a few things of interest. First of all, I'm going to click onto the properties, and I'm just going to scroll down here, And in here, you can see that we have something called security defaults. Now, the security defaults, you can come in and you can manage them. Now, just to say that if you don't see the security defaults, it's because you're already using Microsoft conditional access. So conditional access kind of overrides those. So if you don't see that, don't worry, you're already protected anyway. So you can see in this case, I've gone ahead and enabled them, and I'm quite happy. It's doing a pretty good job. And what this does is it essentially switches on things like multi-factor authentication for all users. Really useful, and it can prevent 99.9% of phishing attacks. Now, of course, if you want to switch them off, you're quite within your right to go and do that and then create your own conditional access policies. But I really love this feature, the fact that you're protected. Again, just double check that it's actually enabled. So this is one of the first things you would do with a new tenant. So there you have it, security defaults. So I'm here in this demo tenant, and it's super important that you get your authentication methods right in Microsoft Entra. So to do this, I'm simply going to come down here into the identity portal. I'm going to click into protection, and a couple of things. First of all, identity protection is only available with a P2 license. So you would either have to purchase this separately, or you could go and, for example, get an E5. But I have to be honest, there's quite a difference between an E5 and a business premium. So business premium, I would say, is definitely worth this. This is the business premium, of course, gives you things like conditional access. And the key thing here is you get an Entra P1 license, which is a premium P1. And the conditional access features are worth its weight in gold. Now, in addition, of course, you also get things like this. So these are our authentication policies. So in here, there's a few things that you will just want to be aware of, a few weak kind of areas. Voice calls and email, for example, and SMS. Bruce Schneider, a famous hacker during COVID, he did some research and he determined that these, specifically SMS and voice calls, were potentially liable or easier to potentially intercept or hack. So again, you know, if you're designing an authentication policy, this is something that you might not want to include. Please note, though, that we do have the Microsoft Authenticator. So again, super easy to initialize. Just simply switch it on. You can select either users or groups, configure it, and again, really importantly, use one-time passcodes, absolutely. Show the application name and also show the geographic location. Again, super important, but it's a simple thing to miss. So in the earlier versions of this particular app, we didn't have these. So you were much more likely to have a user receive a pop-up saying, oh, you need to approve this sign-in. You would go, oh, yes, it's just me, and just accept it. But here it's actually showing you the name of the app and the name of the location. So for example, Bob is in Sydney, Australia, trying to open up Microsoft Teams. Well, hang on, that can't be right because Bob is sat right next to me. So again, the authentication method's absolutely important, super important here, actually. Just another couple of things. The FIDO keys, that's the pass keys, of course. One of the cool things about this now, again, completely available for P1 licenses. You can come in, you can configure this. Super easy to configure, sits alongside the Authenticator app, but this means that you've got what we call shareable passkeys. So these passkeys are not device bound. They can be bound to, for example, your Apple account or your Azure Key Vault account. Absolutely superb. Definitely check those out. They're really worth knowing. So just while we're here, the last thing that I want to show you in Entra, and super important for Microsoft 365, is this concept of conditional access. Now, this is a definite benefit that you get in the business premium that you really don't get in business standard. I highly recommend that you implement this kind of right away. So conditional access, super important. Some of the first things you might want to configure is a terms of use. So a terms of use, of course, is used basically a PDF. Then users need to accept your terms and conditions. So super useful there. The other thing that you probably want to do, as I just showed you the authentication methods, you can actually configure your own authentication strength here. So for example, here I'm in Sterling, so I could call this my Sterling AU authentication strength, and I could just say, hey, for this I just want to have phishing resistant MFA. So just to give you an idea that phishing resistant uses or requires a biometric as well as a passkey, whether virtual or physical. And the difference is that along with that biometric, it means that there are no usernames and passwords transmitted. So from a phishing perspective, you are 99.999% sure that you're going to be secure, basically. All right, so that's one thing. And I can go ahead and I can create this authentication strength if I want to. So easy to create your own. So coming back into conditional access, I'm going to create a policy, and I just want to show you there is one policy. I'm sure you've all had a look at this. I just want to compare this with, for example, an E5 subscription. And for the life of me, I don't know why Microsoft have done this, but let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go into, let's say, selected users and groups, and I'm going to go into, let's say, directory roles. So I'm going to scroll down, and for the directory role, let's just say for the user admin role. Okay, so users who are using user admin, these are the target resources. I'm going to say a particular app, and in this case, we want to protect admins. So I'm going to come into the admin portals here, and I'll select Office 365 as well. And that's the condition. So again, I could say the conditions are, accessing them on any device, let's say. So I'm just going to say any device. I'm going to say client apps. So I just want my users using browser and mobile apps because, of course, these are legacy and don't necessarily support MFA or passwordless authentication. The other thing that you can also do is there's a couple of options here. I won't cover this. I've covered those in previous versions. But essentially, I want to grant access, but I'm going to either require multi-factor authentication or, as I just showed you, you can also require your own authentication strength as well. So I can easily come in here. Now you see that this hasn't come in yet. Sometimes it can take a couple of minutes for that to come in, but you can see it's the same one anyway. I've got phishing resistant MFA. Now the key thing is you can have one or the other. So you see that one is actually grayed out. So I'm just going to click onto that and I'm going to say, yep, that looks good to me. Okay, so there we go, multi-factor authentication. I'm going to click onto that. And the final thing that I want to do is I want to come into my session control here. So with continuous access evaluation, what this does is it's continuously monitoring those users' signals. So any kind of unusual behavior, it's going to say, hey, would you mind just re-signing in again for me? Now, just to show you a major difference between the E5 and I think Business Premium, and for the life of me I don't understand why Microsoft have done this, but you can see here in the E5 I've done pretty much the same kind of demo here. I'm going to go into the same conditions, and I'm not using identity protection here. We also have, you see, a number of additional options. Let me just zoom that in a little bit for you there. But again, things like client apps, I'll say the same thing again. I don't want these older apps because potentially they are a potential issue here. But I do want to grant access. So I'm just going to say grant access, require multi-factor authentication. And again, I'm just going to select that. And then finally, the session option. So you can see here within the session that if I scroll down, we have this token protection. Now, again, this is currently in preview here, but again, it's in an E5 preview. So again, if you haven't switched that on, definitely switch that on, because token protection prevents an adversary in the middle attack, and really important component in zero trust security. Okay, so the next feature that I want to take a look at can be switched on in Business Premium as well as an E5. Now, I honestly think that Business Premium is well worth the money. I just feel that Business Standard is just a little too basic, especially when it comes to some of those security settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into Microsoft 365. I'm going to go into my security portal here. And in the security portal, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to come into my threat policies. So this particular portal, of course, one of the nice things about Business Premium is that it has quite a lot of these features already built in. So it's taking almost kind of the best of, for example, the E5, the EMNS Plus, and of course you also get Intune as well, but you also get a lot of the E5 features in here. So I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to come into policies and rules, and I'm going to come into the threat policies here. Now again, a new tenant, you want to secure it. What are some of the best tips and advice that I can give you? Well, number one, you don't need third-party antivirus software. I got to put my hand up to Microsoft here. Their Defender suite of products is absolutely superb. So anti-phishing, anti-spam, some of the default policies here are excellent. What you do get, though, extra is the safe attachments and safe links. Absolutely worth their weight in gold, these, I have to say. So again, I can come in here and I can definitely say, hey, I want to go in and I want to create a basic rule. So for this, I'm in Sterling today, so I'm just going to call this my Sterling Office. I'll call this my Sterling Office SA policy. So my safe attachment policy. I'll click on next. We can do it for individual users. You can do it for groups of users, multiple groups, and you can do it for your entire domain as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one for my sales users. So I'm going to come in here and I'll say, hey, this is my sales team, and I will click on next. Now, essentially, we've got 4 rules. So if you have a security organization, a SOC, of course, you might want to create a dedicated kind of malware mailbox. So somebody, let's say, a person who's monitoring that mailbox, who's testing the emails, the attachments that are coming in. So you've got like a professional analyst here. So in this case, you can choose to monitor, so deliver the message and just track the results. You can block the message, of course, and all the attachments. So my favorite one is the dynamic delivery. And what this does is it initially delivers the message without the attachment. And that attachment goes into what we call a detonation chamber, a sandbox. And essentially it tests it. Is it executable? Is it making registry calls? Is it malicious? And so on. So finally, if it's tested and it's benign, it will then reattach itself and it will send that attachment to you. Again, it really doesn't take that long, but absolutely fantastic. And you can see I'm just going to click on that and submit that, and I've now gone ahead and created my safe attachment policy. Absolutely worth its weight in gold and a real benefit, especially over the likes of Business Standard that doesn't include this. In my opinion, this is it's a godsend for security. The last thing that I would just want to show you here is the Save Links policy. Again, here's one that I made earlier. Again, very, very similar. It monitors literally thousands and thousands of potentially malicious links. And to cut a long story short, if the link comes in as red, definitely don't click onto it. In fact, it won't let you click onto it. But if it comes in as yellow, it means it's scanning all the links in chat messages, in documents, in web pages, to see if they're malicious. So up next, an absolutely critical thing that I get asked about all the time is, Andy, is there a way that I can manage external sharing? So all external sharing essentially comes from here in SharePoint. So whether you're sharing content out in groups, in Microsoft Teams, through email, whatever, all the permissions, everything essentially comes from here, and you've got to get this right. So here in the SharePoint Admin Center, I'm simply going to come into policies, and I'm going to come into my sharing policies. First up, you can see that we've got two tabs here, one for sharing SharePoint and one for OneDrive. And of course, you can control them independently if you want to. Now, the key thing is the most permissive and the default setting is that anyone can share content and you can share it to anyone. Now, the worst thing about this, it also includes anonymous users. And worst even still is the fact that if you share it, they can then go on and share it without your knowledge. That can be an absolute nightmare. So, and of course, it's all to do with guest access. So if you're inviting guests into your organization, so for example, in Microsoft Teams, you send a guest invite to somebody, great. They also automatically will become a guest in your directory. So one of the things that you can control is you might want to say, hey, well, rather than anonymous and everyone, you might want to bring it down a peg and say, hey, just new and existing guests. So in other words, the guest has to exist in your directory first, or alternatively, your users can invite guests. Now, even kind of more restrictive is existing guests only. So if you're in a super sensitive role or a super sensitive kind of company where if you want to invite guests, you can do so, but you need to perhaps go through, for example, a request process. You need to fill in a form before the guest is actually created, then this is better for you. Sharing with only people inside your organization is down to this lowest tab here. So, for example, let's just say that's the one that I want to go with. I'm going to click on Save, and I can then, what this does, I can then go into the individual sites. So the individual sites, of course, they might be websites, they might be a Microsoft team, a Microsoft 365 group, whatever it is. So if I go into my Microsoft HQ, you can see that in here we have, for example, a settings page. And in the settings page, again, super important. Do you want to let people outside the organization email this team? Do you want to send copies of emails? Don't include this in the address book. Super important. Remember that in teams and groups, a private group is by invitation only. Public group, anyone can join. Watch out for that. And you can see here, here's that same sheet tab again. So you can control this on a per website, or I can come in through the groups tab or the teams tab here. And you can see it's actually picked up my settings. So if I want to just say for this particular website is existing guests only, again, you can do that here. So you can either configure that either here in the sites in Microsoft SharePoint, or you can see I can pop over into Teams and Groups. And if I click into, let's say, Sterling HQ here and go into settings, you get exactly the same settings. So it really doesn't matter kind of which page you go into. I really like that, the fact that it's available in both screens. So there you go, just a little bit about get your sharing right. Believe me, it can save you quite a few headaches. So of course we can't talk about security and compliance without really talking about Copilot. Microsoft, of course, may want you to think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course it is, it does a great job. However, it's super important that you secure your data as well. As wonderful as Copilot is, if you don't secure your data with labeling and classification and data loss prevention policies, then essentially things can leak. and that's the last thing that you want. So for the last thing that I want to show you today, I'm going to come into Microsoft Purview. And here we've got, for example, information protection. You've got data loss prevention policies, which is just wonderful. Now, I've done videos on all of these previously, but for now, I just want to show you a very quick example of a data loss prevention policy. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to create a policy. And when you create the policy, essentially what we're doing is you're creating it from a template. So you're going to get a policy template, and of course, depending on what type of business that you're involved with. So are you concerned about privacy, medical and health, financial, and so on? So for this example, I'm going to choose financial, and I'm going to say UK financial data. And you can see that this is looking for credit card numbers, debit card numbers, SWIFT codes, and so on. So I can then click on next, and I want to create a data loss prevention policy that will protect my data from leaking outside of my organization. And again, I've not got any on-premises here, so it's all groups, all sites, all OneDrive accounts, all teams, everything. So I'm going to click next, and you can see, by the way, you can say credit card. You can add to these if you wanted as well. So if you wanted to add additional things in, you could easily do that. Just one thing that's super useful. If I click on the little pencil here, how do you want to implement this? So you can implement it. You can set up some exceptions, of course. You can do an action. So for example, I want to restrict or encrypt content in these Microsoft 365 locations, and I want to block it for people outside my organization. So really super important that you also can set up, for example, policy tips that say, you know, this is a protected document, for example. But the most important one can be found here. So you can come in and you can say, allow users to override the policy restriction. So use the policy restriction, of course, if you click onto this and then choose require a business justification. So I can now email you. I can now send you that credit card number potentially. But the thing is, here it's going to say, are you sure you want to send that? And if you say yes, you've got to put in a reason, and that's then audited. So if you switch that off, it will not. That's it. You are not allowed to send any data. And that's super important because here in Copilot will basically filter that result, and it will essentially say, hey, I'm not allowed to show you this information. So things like label classifications, Copilot really pays attention to this stuff. So again, you really need to take a look at the Compliance Center here in Microsoft Purview. So there you have it, keeping you safe in Microsoft 365, my top tips. I really hope that you enjoyed that and you found them useful. Questions, comments, as always, get them down below. And if you've not subscribed, you know what to do up there. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you next time. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.